Hey, thanks for tuning in. In this video, we're going to talk about problems with the book of Hebrews. The epistle to the Hebrews in the New Testament is a book that uses a lot of symbolism and tries to derive a lot of meaning from the law, from the rituals, and from the priesthood that's talked about in the Torah. The thing is that it is a very anti-Torah book, despite the fact that it's masquerading as being a teaching on the law. It actually teaches the law incorrectly several times, and of course it makes no secret about the fact that it's seeking to abolish the law. It talks about very overtly that the law is being changed, and of course we know based upon Deuteronomy 4:2 and Deuteronomy 12:32 that this is not allowed. We are not allowed to add to the law and take away from the law. In Deuteronomy 13:5, in talking about false prophecies, says that a false prophet's teachings seek to compel us from the way which we are commanded to walk. One of the ways which we are commanded to walk is to not add to or take away from the law. And furthermore, there are other commands, such as in regard to the priesthood, which we are commanded, and Hebrews seeks to abolish that as well. Now, it's important that we draw a distinction that Hebrews never talks about it being a prophecy. Hebrews does not teach what it believes, teach what the author believes as being prophetic or as being received. At least it does not do this overtly. This is different than how Paul teaches, for example. Paul talks about how this is what he received supposedly from God whenever he makes his false prophecies in his books. And so this is one reason why I would argue that Hebrews is not written by Paul, but in my view, that's kind of a distraction. That's not what we should focus on when we are discussing Hebrews with someone. There are some very overt problems with Hebrews apart from this. And even though it is just a teaching, it's just one guy's opinion that somehow ended up in the canon, it still is problematic because a lot of people treat it as if it is the Word of God, which it isn't. And so let's talk about some of the actual problems with the book of Hebrews in more detail. These are a couple of minor points to start with, but it shows how it does not teach the law correctly. The idea that there is no pardoning apart from blood, that blood must always be offered for pardoning or for atonement to be received. Hebrews talks about this very overtly in Hebrews 9:22. It talks about how almost everything in the law is purified by blood, and that without blood there is no pardoning. The thing is that we can look into the Torah and see otherwise. We can see multiple examples of this. And you might want to take note of what the Greek translation of the Torah, the Septuagint, says regarding these issues, regarding the wording that it uses, and compare the wording used in Hebrews so that you can show people, hey, look what's going on. It's using the same wording at times. So a couple examples of pardoning going on without the offering of blood in the Torah. We can look at, for example, Leviticus 5:11-13. It talks about if someone is too poor to make an offering of animals, that they're just supposed to offer flour. Ground grains, that does not involve blood. And yet it says this provides covering, this provides pardoning for the person, this provides atonement. So no blood, but yet there's atonement, there's covering. Okay, Hebrews is wrong at least once. Let's look some more. Also, it talks about in Exodus 30, it talks about they're taking up the tax for the tabernacle to be built. And it says that this tabernacle offering, this tax, is to provide covering for them. So once again, giving money is not shedding blood. Money is different than blood. Money is what's being offered here. So once again, Hebrews is wrong again on this. And also we can look at Numbers 16, which we will be returning to shortly. In Numbers 16, it talks about how Aaron offered incense, and that this incense was offered to provide covering, and indeed it did stop the plague that was upon the Israelites at the time. So incense, that's not an offering of blood, that's an offering of incense. And also, finally, we're going to talk about the Midianite plunder at the end of Numbers. In Numbers 31, it talks about how the Israelite armies came forth and they offered from the plunder as an offering to make covering or atonement over them. So once again, there are several points on which Hebrews just mischaracterizes the law, either intentionally or unintentionally. It doesn't really matter. And of course, this is a big problem if the way that we're learning the law is through the New Testament. The law should not be learned through the New Testament because it doesn't teach it correctly oftentimes. They do not either know what the law says, which seems to be the case with the false prophet Paul at times. It seems that he simply just doesn't even know what the law says. But maybe it wasn't done because of ignorance. Maybe it was for other reasons. Now, in some ways, these are kind of minor points. They're not going to be the focus of what we talk about. But I bring these up because obviously the author of Hebrews is mischaracterizing the law. The thing is that he does overtly seek to change the law, and it's something which was mentioned earlier, something which is definitely a problem. The general theme of the book of Hebrews, especially the first two-thirds of it, so to speak, is generally talking about symbolism from the law and trying to derive a higher meaning and then applying that higher meaning to the present and future according to the author of Hebrews. And one thing it does is it talks a lot about the rituals, the priesthood, and talks about the articles of the tabernacle. One thing I found interesting when I read through Hebrews recently was the fact that it never mentioned the overlay on the altar. It never drew attention to the overlay that was made in Numbers 16 for the altar. I think it's very interesting that it omitted that. I don't know whether it was an intentional omission or not. But the symbolism of this, the symbolism that is actually taught in the law, is very much contrary to what Hebrews teaches. In Numbers 16, it talks about the rebellion of Korah. Korah and his congregation got together and they tried to essentially overthrow the leadership of Moses and Aaron, and they tried to subvert the priesthood. They sought the priesthood for themselves effectively. And so a group of them got together, and they got together with copper fire pans, and they brought forth incense to the tabernacle. When they did this, fire came forth and destroyed the people that were offering the incense, and also the earth was rended apart, and the people fell into the hole. Other people fell into the ground below them, and it was all supposed to be different signs to prove that these people are rebelling against the commandment of God. This is not allowed. And so, of course, the fire came forth and destroyed the people offering the incense, and these fire pans were left over. And it was commanded what they were supposed to do with the fire pans is they were supposed to cast the fire out in the distance, and then they were supposed to hammer these fire pans into an overlay around the altar. And it says that the purpose of this overlay is so that the children of Israel will recognize that they are not to rebel any further. They are to recognize that this rebellion was quashed and that the priesthood of Aaron is the only legitimate priesthood. It even says that only Aaron is authorized to offer incense. Only Aaron and his descendants are authorized to offer incense at the tabernacle to God in that way. Only Aaron is authorized to do that in Numbers 16, verse 40. And the passage even goes on further, and there are more signs that are provided. There's the sign of Aaron's rod. Now, this is talked about in Hebrews, but not particularly with a lot of attention. The rod of Aaron, well, they brought forth rods for each of the tribes. This is what was commanded in Numbers 17. They brought forth a rod for each tribe. And for the tribe of Levi, they brought forth a rod with Aaron's name on it. Now, all of these rods were brought into the tabernacle, including the rod of Judah, I might add. And they were all brought in there, and Aaron's rod brought forth flowers, it budded flowers, and it also brought forth almonds, according to Numbers 17. And this was to be a sign against the rebels. It was to be a sign that Aaron is the authorized priest, that Aaron and his descendants are the ones that have been chosen. And this was said so that it would absolve all of the questions that they had, and so it would resolve the issue, and it would stop them from rebelling. Well, the thing is that I guess Hebrews, the author of Hebrews, did not get that lesson, because here he comes and he's teaching that the priesthood has been changed. The priesthood's not allowed to be changed according to the law. He talks about a Melchizedek priesthood, and of course he references Genesis. There is the figure Melchizedek, which Abraham interacts with very briefly. And of course, in only talking to him and about him briefly, there is a lot of room to make assumptions, and there's a lot of room to draw symbolism here. And so being kind of a mysterious figure, that leaves him completely open for the author of Hebrews to exploit for his purposes. And of course, he also references a passage in Psalms, a Psalm of David or Psalm about David, in talking about you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Now, the thing is that the law never talks anything about an order of Melchizedek. It never talks about any priesthood other than the priesthood of Aaron. The priesthood of Aaron, the Levitical priesthood, is the only priesthood ever talked about in the law, ever authorized in the law. And instead we have signs and wonders showing that, hey, there aren't supposed to be these other people coming and subverting Aaron's priesthood. And we could also reference, of course, Exodus 29:9, Exodus 40:15, which talk about how Aaron's priesthood is a priesthood of Olam. The thing is that a lot of people are arguing now, a lot of Christians I've encountered now will argue that Olam doesn't really mean perpetual, it doesn't really mean forever. And this is arguably debatable, in my opinion. It definitely doesn't mean what we would use the word forever to mean. But the thing is that if they want to argue that, one point that could be brought up is, let's look at how the Greek renders it, and let's compare it with the New Testament. We can look at how the Greek translates the Hebrew word olam in the Septuagint and compare that. Compare that with what goes on in the New Testament. And we will see that the same word is used in the New Testament for forever. And I am pretty sure that a lot of people aren't going to be willing to say that doesn't mean forever. Yet in this case, we're talking about the same word. We're talking about the same word. Now, if you wanted to just completely circumvent that whole discussion, that whole debate, just look at Deuteronomy 18:5. Deuteronomy 18:5 says that the Levites are chosen all the days, that they are the ones chosen to minister before God, that they are uniquely chosen as compared to any other tribe or any other group or individual. That the priests of Aaron are the ones that are chosen. And of course, it doesn't always render it as all the days. In a lot of translations it says forever. Whenever I brought up this verse to someone recently, they tried to argue that well, olam doesn't mean forever. But right here, it doesn't say olam. It says all the days. And that is very literally what it says. And if we are talking about right now, there are still days. If we're talking about in the future, there are still days. So all of that is encompassed by all the days. And so the priesthood of Aaron, the Levitical priesthood, is chosen to minister before God all the days. So when Hebrews says that there is a change in the priesthood, when Hebrews says that there is a change in the law, they are directly going against what it says here. It says all the days. So how does Hebrews get the idea that we're not in days anymore, that all the days has ended, and now we're in a dayless spirit period of time? How does Hebrews get that idea? How does it justify it? Well, it just simply says that it's changed. It doesn't justify it. It tries to say that, We have a new priest who's in the likeness of Melchizedek. Melchizedek, of course, being the name or the title of some mysterious figure in Genesis. And we should draw a distinction that it doesn't say that Melchizedek in Genesis is the Messiah. It says in Hebrews that he is the likeness of Melchizedek. So that might be worth noting. And despite that, that is the best that he can bring forth to say that the law has changed. The law very clearly teaches that there is only one priesthood. And there are repeated signs, repeated things that are done to verify this. And repeatedly throughout the commands, it talks about Aaron, it talks about the Levites, and it talks about Aaron and his descendants, and it talks about Phinehas being the grandson of Aaron. These are the people that are chosen to be the priests. The Levites are chosen all the days. And if you've seen my King of Israel video, which you can check in the description below, there will be a link there. We talked about how in Deuteronomy 17, that when the king of Israel is on his throne, that there is supposed to be a legitimate Levitical priesthood at that time. Not only before it, but it says while he's on the throne, there is the Levitical priesthood. And so obviously this goes on even during the time of the Israelite monarchy. So the priesthood of Levi continues, the priesthood of Aaron continues. It is the only legitimate priesthood. The book of Hebrews is very anti-Torah. It teaches incorrectly about the law, not only in that it mischaracterizes certain commands, it says certain things about the law which are not supported by the law itself, but it also goes on to very overtly teach that the law has been changed, that the law has been abolished. These are things which are obviously problematic, and we should stand against these teachings. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like this video and to share it if you think it could be useful to others. And feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, so we can stay in touch and we can talk about more Torah issues. Thanks for watching. Remember the commands. Peace.